Hey, what is up, y'all? Welcome to Cocktail Hour with Heavy Cardboard. And you guys, I imagine everybody out there knows who you are, but I figure I ought to do some sort of an introduction. So, hey, y'all, this is Cole Wehrle, perennial runner-up for the Golden Elephant. He is
true.
the, not Sissy Spacek, who is it? The actress that...
It was like Meryl Streep
Meryl
until
Streep,
recently.
that's it. Yes, and it's a running joke with Cole and I now, so I think it's okay to make that joke. But no, Cole Wehrle, designer of, as you can see below Cole, John Company, Oath, Root, Infamous Traffic, Pax Premier Second Edition. I'm sure there are others off the top of my head that I'm not remembering.
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good flyby.
Yeah, not bad. So welcome, Cole. How you doing?
It's good
tonight?
to be here.
Thanks.
Feels nice. Like I feel like I'm like a show native. This is just such a nice place to circle back to.
Right.
When you offered, there was no hesitation.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I'm glad to see. So I am enjoying a caipirinha, the national drink of Brazil, which is let me get this right. It's basically rum, but it's not. It's cachaça. That's it. It's cachaça, a muddled lime, and about a teaspoon and a half of sugar. Oh yeah,
Okay.
I was worried about that. Apparently, you're echoing.
Oh,
So I need to figure this out. Give me a second.
It's all right.
You know what? I'm curious. All right, Cole, say something.
Hello, check.
All
Hope I'm
right,
not
see if that's any better. Let me know. All right, everybody say, yeah, we thought we had that figured out, but apparently we don't.
Is it still on? That's
I
too
don't
bad.
know. Give it about 20 seconds since I
That's right,
changed
because
something.
of the delay.
Let me hit apply. Hold on, wait. Now, say something.
All right. Okay. Well, I'm enjoying a very simple drink that is not unlike yours.
All right, what is it?
It's just a limonada with some tequila in it, and also some muddled lime and things we had lying around. I just didn't. I felt I was caught like slightly flat-footed when I realized I actually didn't really have anything on home, but we had a little tequila left, and it was good enough.
That works. All right, good. That's better, apparently. We got it fixed. Oh, hey, Arnaldo says, I am from Brazil, drinking as well a caipirinha. So cheers to everybody out there in the peanut gallery. So before we get started, now, for anybody that hasn't hung out with me and whoever my guest is with the cocktail hour, a little background first. It was one night, 2 months ago, maybe, when in the middle of the stay-at-home order, which I'll be honest, it's lightened up here in Massachusetts, but we're still taking it serious and we're still basically abiding by that. But I was driving home. I had gone I did something. It doesn't matter. I was out driving and I'm like, man, I don't feel like working tonight, but at the same time, I don't feel like if I'm not going to work, I feel like I need to do something work related, but I don't want to be by myself. What do I want to do? And then literally as I'm having that thought, I get a text from Clay Ross from Capstone. And I was like, oh, maybe we could just kind of like do a little Q&A, a little informal thing. And I was like, hey, you willing? And he's like, yeah, all right, sure. He's like, I always get so nervous when I'm going to be on your show. And I'm like, dude, seriously? And he was like, yeah. I'm like, we're going to have a drink. We're going to just chew the fat, have fun, relaxed, informal. Boom, cocktail hour of Heavy Cardboard was born. So that's what we're doing tonight. So it's informal. I'm sure I'm going to ask a bunch of questions because that's my nature and everything. But
I have no book to promote.
right. So the most important question, though, legitimately, is how's you and the family? How are you guys getting on during this?
We're good. It's these are strange times. We've had a very weird quarantine because we've been pretty strict, but also we have a little yard and we live in the city, so we have neighbors on either side that garden and hang out in their yard, and so we see them every day at a distance of 20 feet or something. But I have been talking to them and kind of keeping up with them through it all, and we've been fine. I think we have 3 kids at home, and it's been a lot to juggle The remote learning lessons and trying to just maintain our sanity, and me trying to keep the projects going on time. But mostly quarantine has sort of been fine. It has been like the fact that I feel very lucky to be able to stay working. It's so I think that I always try to check myself when I'm like, oh, I've had this hard week or something. It's like, well, all the projects are still moving. Everyone's fine and healthy here. So it's been fine, and we've actually been spending a lot of time outside and just sort of like going on hikes and bike rides, and Minnesota so far has done a pretty good job. So we it's early still. Who knows what's going to happen within a week or 2 weeks, but we're back at the office in a very limited capacity. So like just the Oath team is back in the office, and things have lightened up so that my brother Drew is able to drive up from Chicago to have work weekends, and we're very strict about that, but he can come for a few days and then leave. So we're kind of just like slowly rebooting, getting things back to whatever the new normal is going to look like.
All right. Yeah, it's been weird. I mean, same here. Like, outside of I'm not having anybody over for, live streams. Any live streams I've been doing outside of the exception of Jess has all been remote, or it's been a whole lot of solo gaming for me here on the show. But this sounds so bad. I don't know how to word it, but it's almost like not a whole lot has changed for me because I'm working from home, which I already was doing. So I still go out for drives. I still go out for walks. And now that we have a dog, I'm going for a lot more walks, which is, I think, good. We do have a sort of yard because we live in like this apartment that is a house with a built-on stuff. So it's like 4 different, not really families. I mean, it's like me and Jess when Jess is here, and then it's a couple of other couples, and it's 4 of us. We kind of see each other in passing, and we have a backyard, and we have like a table and a couple chairs to where we could dine al fresco on nights like tonight and stuff, right? But we don't have like a yard and neighbors like you guys do. So outside of like seeing people, like when we go for walks or whatever, we wear our masks, we do all of that stuff. But outside of that, I mean, it's pretty much business as usual from that respect. And I feel guilty kind of saying that because I know there are people that still, whether it's the people on the front line, whether it's the medical folks, or whether it's essential workers that are working at restaurants, which I don't know how essential. I digress. I appreciate, and so I feel bad. These people actually have to go out and, their lives have been massively affected, or those that have, God forbid, been furloughed or laid off or whatever. I'm fortunate enough, and kind of like you, like it's, like earlier today, here's a good example. So about an hour and a half ago, I'm setting up Nevada City here on the table, right? And I'm cussing, and I'm like, man, how am I gonna get this to fit right on the camera? And I'm just frustrated, and I'm like, whoa. And Jess busted out and said, remember, you play board games for a living.
Right.
Fair enough. Let's pull back a little bit on that.
Back.
Exactly, right? So
yeah, it's a lot of things that we kind of, it sort of puts everything in perspective, right?
Totally. So yeah, it's just and the one weird thing for me right now, though, and I think the hardest thing. No, not the hardest. Let me rephrase that. On a personal level, we're talking not talking about anything social related as far as the with the protests and everything that's going. Not just me personally. Poker rooms have opened up close around here, but I just don't feel comfortable.
It crosses, so I have in my my small area of absolute privilege that's beginning to come back to normal that I'm relishing is I love to sail. And Minnesota, the Minneapolis Parks Tour has a great little sailing club. It's very cheap. Anybody can do it. Probably the most accessible and open sailing club in the country.
Okay.
And it has reopened with some social distancing guidelines. But the fact that I can like bike and hop on a sailboat and go sail for an afternoon. It's outrageous to be doing that in this time of unrest and during a pandemic, but it is this little thing that we've been savoring lately.
And you know what? Your and like Jess and I and the dog, we go out for hikes, right? Because I mean, do we see people out there? Yes, but we have our masks. We're giving everybody wide berths. We're doing all of that stuff, right? And it feels like you said, it feels weird that you're taking advantage of. I mean, it was 87 here. It was straight up hot
Oh
today.
yeah, it's beautiful.
It's gorgeous, and then in the evenings and stuff, it's amazing. And you feel weird going out there and almost feel guilty, like, oh, hey, I'm able to enjoy these things but at the same time, like, there's a restaurant here in town that has apparently gotten permission we live in a small town here in Wakefield, and Main Street, think old school Main Street. That's exactly what our Main Street is here. And there's parking spaces up and down on both sides of Main Street. And they have like gotten permission to block off their area. There's no parking in front of their restaurant, and they have a tent, or at least a top, not really the sides. And they have outdoor seating because that's been started for a couple weeks now. And I'm like, nope, no interest.
Nope.
And
it's like a step too far.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like I'm dying to go play poker. And the fact that the poker rooms near here are 6 max because they're spacing people out around the table and all of this stuff. And that's where I excel is shorthanded play. And I'm like, I so want to. And I'm like,
give it a couple months.
Yeah. And that's the thing. We're not talking weeks. We're talking, it's going to be a while still. Things are getting worse. They're not getting better now that states seem to have loosened up. And
we go pretty far into it. It's not super clear what exactly is happening, but it doesn't seem great.
Yeah, totally. So anyway, board games.
We do those things.
We do those things. Like I said, I have Nevada City set up here in front of me. I see you have Root behind you, but also
this is a funny. This is a Root. This is where show and tell. This was a gift from Patrick, but it's the Root Shadow Box.
That's awesome.
Yeah, this is a Christmas gift he gave the members of the staff.
That's fantastic, dude.
Yeah, it's great. It's so heavy that I'm hesitant to hang it on a wall, but
I don't know. There are those 3M things that are weighted for like 40 pounds and stuff, but still,
right. Like,
you have kids.
Find a stud.
And yeah, totally. I get that. So, but yeah. So okay. You said the Oath team is coming back in. So how many people are there? And I saw that Gates is in chat. So hi, Gates.
Yeah.
Gates,
hey, Gates,
being part of the Leader Games crew up there in Minnesota. But how many people are there at Leader Games now? And
so there are like 10 of us, I think. It depends on how you count. There might be like 11 by certain counts. And 7 people are in the Twin Cities. Is that right? I'm going to say 7. 7's my from the hip.
Okay, it's a prime number. Go with it.
Yeah, I like that number.
Yeah.
Just fine. And from that group, we have there are basically 3 of us are working primarily on Oath at the moment. So because we're moving into a part of the stage where we just actually need to print the game out, Oath's development has been so strange. It has not been greatly affected by COVID. It's been a little affected, and I don't want to minimize that in case we have to use it as a Kickstarter excuse later. But
I was going to ask about that, and I still will. But continue.
There are ways that COVID did affect the project, but when it comes to like the development, it hasn't really. It did change the character of development, and what it did. Oh yeah, Josh. Hey, Josh. So Josh.
Hey, Josh is there. Yep. All right.
Many Leader Games projects. So a funny thing happened a little bit with the development of the game. So basically, we started moving into a bigger, hotter development phase right as the country went into quarantine. And what this meant was, it was so silly. I spent probably a week building 4 physical kits for office testers. And I had in the Twin Cities a cohort of 16 testers who had committed to play every week for months, and we had all that set up, and then we went into quarantine. And so originally, I was just I mourned the loss of that testing cohort because I love the testers I have in the Twin Cities. I absolutely love. They've actually, many of them I first met when I was working on John Company and other projects, and so it's great to be able to, like, have them even more close at hand. But what happened with the Oath testing is all of the groups around the country that disbanded suddenly became available for board games on the digital side.
Sure. Yeah.
So all of these wonderful minds that I would never have access to because they would have their own groups to play with suddenly were kind of like looking for something to do. And so the Oath Discord, we started an Oath Discord, which people used for pickup games, and has become kind of like the center of our playtesting effort. And they're wonderful. And because when you're playtesting, and for folks in the chat who know about game development, one of the biggest things you have to, or whoever had to do playtesting before, one of the biggest things you have to worry about is the friction. So every time you ask somebody to print a kit, they're going to become more or less likely to print the next kit.
Oh
They just
yeah,
don't, yeah, they
because
just don't want to do it. It's
labor
labor.
as well as, I mean, potential costs and everything to do with that. Yes,
Sure.
it's just
I
a
mean,
pain in the butt.
no, it is, and I get it too. I mean, I actually just bought my first printer in probably a decade, and so anytime I would run into a playtesting, it's like, well, you have to print a bunch of stuff. I thought, oh, this is going to cost me like $100 probably by the time everything's done, and it's going to be just a bunch of work. And what happened was with Tabletop Simulator, which is not a platform I love, but it sort of moves the burden of kit creation onto us. So we have to do a lot more work. I'm a lot more exhausted through this development cycle than other projects I've worked on. But it meant that as soon as we had a new version, it was being playtested that evening. It was a little bit like almost like video game development, where I would go into the thread and post like, okay, here's version 1.61, and here are the patch notes. And you would see people say like, all right, let's play tonight. I want to try it out. And there was just no friction to running those tests. So what's happened is that the development engine that has helped us through Oath has been exceptionally strong, probably stronger than any project I've ever worked on, and both in terms of a variety of player types and the depth of focus they're able to give to the game. So all of that has been great. However, when you play the game on Tabletop Simulator, you're not playing it in person, and so what
Checks out.
yeah, it's just different. And what we've had to do is I petitioned Patrick to allow the Oath Skeleton crew to go to the office because we just had to start playing it in person.
Okay, so I know why I feel those are just really different things. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit, but why do you see those as different things? Even though the rules are no different, like nothing's different other than having the physical things in your hands, moving them around the board. Why are they different to you?
There are a few different components to it. One of them is the Alt key in TTS, which allows you to instantly zoom on a game element and blow it up to the size of the screen.
Yep.
It changes how you look. In TTS, you'll kind of like look far, you'll zoom around. You're able, your vision in Tabletop Simulator is constantly telescoping. And in reality, if someone had their head down, like searching around the board, they'd look like a maniac, right? No one treats visual information that way. So we had to make sure that the visual components were readable. We also had to attend to the physical state of the game. So this is a game that we need to fit into a box. And it was funny, we had made some choices in TTS. We're like, oh, let's put another inch on that. Let's give us a little bit more room for the text to breathe. And then when I started blocking out, Nick Brockman, one of our graphic designers working on the project, built these like packets for all the different game elements so we could see how they fit in the box. And they just, they're not sized in any normal way. So like it was like, oh, this is very clearly wrong, and we had to kind of like rebuild the insert to accommodate this. And the last thing is Oath is a very social game, and that social experience. I mean, a negotiation game that is done just over voice, you miss like I mean, to put it bluntly, like you miss the shot reaction shot kind of framing where the players can react with things other than speech. And so with all those things gone, I felt a little bit like I'd have to like drive a car blindfolded to get the game into the final stage of production in a wholly digital way. And there are ways that we can do that, but it just felt a lot more comfortable if we could be in the office cutting up foam board and putting together actual kits.
And folks may or may not be interested to hear, I actually played Tabletop Simulator for the first time 3 nights ago,
Oh my
I think.
gosh.
Yeah. I got asked to do a test run on PAX Viking, actually.
Cool.
And I had messed around a little bit with Lisboa, and I mean a very little bit. So I had to have like a crash course on how to use Tabletop Simulator as well as how to play PAX Viking. And I'm very anti online implementations of board games because to me, video games are, for me, solo experiences. And so like video games, I tend to prefer like role-playing game, like stuff like The Witcher 3 and
Yep.
stuff
Yep.
like that.
Yep.
And for me, board games should be a tactile and should be a social thing.
Yep.
And there's just something lost on the social
No, there's.
aspect when you are not in person. And I get what you're saying regarding the negotiation aspect because kind of like when you're talking poker, body language matters and nonverbal cues and all of these things all come into play. But it's just,
No,
there's something just,
no, I love video games too, but the video games I love don't really look anything like the board games I love, with maybe the exception of like a Slay the Spire. Most of the video games I play are competitive real-time games.
oh, like
And
StarCraft type stuff.
yeah, like
Or,
StarCraft 2 or Dota, those are like my bedrock video games, or Counter-Strike maybe.
oh, I was going to say, because you're a winner chicken dinner stud at PUBG, right?
It's
You,
true.
you were
I'm
back in the
guilty. I don't PUBG got too hard, and I've kind of fallen off of it. But lately, I've been getting back into StarCraft, and that's been my bread and butter. But that's just it to me on the digital platform. TTS is a useful stopgap. I'm very grateful for it. It allows me to do things I wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So don't get me wrong on that. But I like the medium of board games because of its physical character.
Yes. And
I
to
think
me,
that's.
oh, go
I
ahead.
know. I'll just say one more thing. I know a lot of people who work on really cool app assisted games that I find very interesting conceptually, but they just like there's almost no room for them at my table. Like I just can't like cross that bridge. And it's like absolutely no shade on those creators because I think they're really interesting projects, but they're just not how I think about the
Exact
game.
same. Like a lot of my group actually has been playing the hell out of games, whether it's Tabletop Simulator, Tabletop Arena, or any of those either
Right.
sites or apps or whatever it is. Hell, yeah, they are playing play what you dig. Just it's
Yeah,
not my thing, you know?
sure.
And that's why I have such a hard time. Like, and I'll see people streaming board games like on Tabletop Simulator and all that. And I'm going to do a couple here or there, but I would much rather go through the trudging, if you want to put it. Like, we're going to be playing later on this week, we're going to be playing Nevada City, and we're going to be doing it 3-player. Jess and I will be here in person, and then Ken will be online. And so
Yeah.
he's going to have to say, hey, do this for me, do this, whatever. And I prefer having the physical bits in my hand. It's just, there's just something tactile about this that I much prefer, even if the people are online, as long as I have the game in front of me. It's just different. It's just, yeah, there's something about this that I,
No, I get it. Hey, can I answer a couple of random questions that popped up in the
oh
chat?
yeah, I was going to work backwards, but go for it. Yeah, feel free.
I
No,
just
please do.
I saw two. One, the Queen of Pain, Arcana, and Dota is stupid, and I wish they'd give Chen such a good treatment. So that's just for the Dota players. And then someone asked about inserts, and
I tweeted about this the other
I
night.
know I saw it, and it like I don't know. I can't explain what that tweet did to me, Edward, because we were like, Patty. Hune, who's our one of the amazing graphic design leads that we have, she's like building this like high fidelity physical copy of the insert and like shaving off pieces of foam board, and I'm like, and I see your comment about the bags. So what I just wanted to say about inserts, I think I usually throw them away. I would
Yep.
say if I like glancing over my game collection, almost all those inserts are in a dumpster somewhere.
Or recycled if they're cardboard or whatever. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. But vacuum trays, often can't be recycled. So the reason the inserts suck so badly isn't because well, it's a little bit because the manufacturer doesn't care, but there's a reason for it, which is inserts have two purposes. They are not to organize your game. They are to make sure the game doesn't get damaged in shipping.
Yep.
And so, like, once you square those two things, just so much more makes sense. The insert is to protect the publisher from replacement pieces.
I get that. So the box doesn't cave in. I get that. Like, that's for cardboard.
Or like even for like bags of pieces or cards or things, so they don't like shoot at each other. Now, this immediately gets to a problem, which is, as you know, or as anyone who plays games knows, when you get a deck of cards that's shrink wrapped, it's very tight. And then the moment you undo it, it's bigger. And you can never make it take up that same space. So already insert designers have this really elemental problem, which is the game when it's unpacked is a different shape from a game when it is unpunched and unwrapped.
Not only that, but I mean, you're talking about player pieces. Like I imagine, like, for whatever game, like, okay, the red player gets these pieces, we bag those separately, whatever, instead of in one big bag of whatever it was. So I hear you. But here, okay, so, go ahead.
No, you get in here. You get in here.
But no, I hear you, and that's why I support cardboard inserts that are, oh hell, I had it in a moment.
Ooh,
so we're talking. I was just talking about Nevada City because I have it set up here on the table. Right here, let me bust this out. All right, here is your typical cardboard insert that you're looking at, right? To where it has enough for the punch boards on the top and the boards and everything, to where now the box won't cave and it won't, have that get crushed in the whole 9 yards. As soon as this is done, this gets tossed, and now I have a bunch of baggies that I throw in here. I put the boards in flat. I put all that in. That's fine. That's perfect, in my opinion, because once you go into a vacuum form or a vacuum form plastic insert, even though I'm sure there is a ton of work that goes into those for designing them, 98% still suck because they just don't work.
Well, you cannot build. Everybody also packs their games away differently. So, and the reason why we've spent so much time on the oath insert is because I very foolishly promised people, either in a comment or it doesn't matter where I promised it. It's serious enough that I'm treating it as a promise, that the insert would allow you to store the game in any orientation and with sleeved cards or unsleeved cards, which has been kind of an engineering nightmare. But we've also kind of gotten to it. What I have found ends up happening if you get serious about inserts, I'm going to toot my own horn, is that you end up with, here, I'll show you guys. This is from the second printing of Premiere. This is almost nothing, right? And people who are really, really keen-eyed will note that like this chamber, which is where all the wooden pieces goes, got about like 5 millimeters wider from the first printing to the second. We will not be doing replacements. I'm sorry. I'm sure I'm always hesitant to call out little differences like that, but it's just to give a tiny bit more room because the mat can be rolled a little bit tighter than originally. Anyway, what ends up happening, at least I find with the good inserts, is the good inserts get out of your flipping way. And if somebody wants to put a like little tray, a little like box with the wooden pieces, or if someone wants to use baggies, doesn't matter. All the insert is doing is stopping the components from crushing each other. So like for the oath insert, it's a very simple insert, really. It's got a well for the mat so that you don't crush the mat. And then it's got another well for all the cards so that the components don't crush the cards and the cards don't crush the mat. And then it has a giant well for everything else.
And store it how you want in that regard, right?
Just store it how you want. as much as I admire like the ingenuity of like the game trays folks, that's not like a service that I feel like I personally want, because I would rather give players a lot of freedom. And also, I think that the game trays approach works best for games like Parks, where it works amazingly.
Well,
Uh,
okay. Well, for those that are unfamiliar with that, what makes that
so
so good?
Parks, it has relatively few pieces and is a nice like light to medium weight game, but it does have more pieces than the average game in that weight category. So you really need a tray that helps you set up the game very quickly and is attractive, but also you don't need like 100 track tiles. So it's just more like organized component wells, but none of the wells have very many pieces in them.
And
Um,
and on that note, somebody in chat had mentioned that I think it was Luke from Australia in the house that what if you're going to make an insert, make it to where it helps with saving time setting up the game, because having a million different little compartments of having, okay, this piece fits perfectly here, and then this piece fits perfectly there, or this stack of tiles fits perfectly there, that's all fine and good, but it becomes a nightmare putting it back together, like when you're actually cleaning back up.
right,
And
right.
two, does it somehow help me in setting up the game, or is it just a cool little puzzle and game in and of itself and it doesn't help with setup or teardown? Then what the hell is the point of wasting all that money and time making this insert that
Mhm.
doesn't solve a problem, really?
Right. The ones that get me are like the player piece wells, because they just waste so much time, because you're like digging out the pieces out of the well. I feel like this was very common in like early 2000s Euro games. You had these like kind of goofy wells where all the player pieces were in them, and they were like small enough that you couldn't bag the components in them. You had to like just dump the components naked, and then you're like digging them out.
Right.
And there are really good companies that have like been attacking the insert problem, but our whole, I mean, the way we like to do things, leader, and I appreciate this mentality, is if we can learn how to do it ourselves, we're just going to do it ourselves. And so for something like Oath, we could have commissioned somebody or brought in partners, but we're all crafty people, and we thought, no, like let's design this insert ourselves and get really, into the weeds. Yeah, but Patty's taking the lead on it. She's done a great job.
Well, I mean, and you talked about, I mean, there's Meeple Realty, there's the game trays, I'm trying to think, there are a Broken Token. Apparently there's a company out there called Folded Space that I'm unfamiliar with. But all these aftermarket, which, I mean, I'm most familiar with the Meeple Realty ones, and they are amazing. However, for those that are budget conscious,
Yeah, it's not.
you're basically having to pay almost, twice. So I mean, the inserts are anywhere, I'm guessing nowadays, between $30 and $60, depending on how involved they are. And so they absolutely assist with setup and everything, but it's that extra cost that
Right.
not everybody is going to be willing to take on. So I'm of the mind that if you're not going to do exactly what it is that you and I are talking about, then do your typical insert with just that protects the game during shipping, and throw in a bunch of baggies, and let's go from there. Because
Yeah, totally.
maybe not right now because my library is a disaster, but normally I shelve all my games vertically,
Mm,
and
mm.
most inserts don't
Will
play
not.
well
No, will
with
not
that.
handle it. Yeah.
Aftermarket ones of the companies that we just talked about, they do take that into account. 99% of inserts out there,
Hmm.
bad idea. So it doesn't work. So, yeah. So I'm curious, now that you say you guys have taken that on, regret it? Or is that.
No, no, it's good. It just makes us more conscious of the thing. I mean, after I spent a lot of time on the Premiere insert, and I was so happy with how it turned out. And
Oh,
it's
you
funny
did
because
great on that, I will say.
but it's
Yes.
a very simple insert, and so you look at it and you're like, well, this seems like something that a factory would have just turned over. And it took a lot of iteration and going back and forth to get it to be exactly right. Because again, this is just a place where people's priorities are in different places. and the factory just wants to make sure the game gets to you without anything breaking anything else inside the box, right? Especially a game like Premiere, where one of the components is basically just a bunch of rocks. So you don't want that smashing up everything. No, I think going forward, it would be my vote that we would like continue doing our insert design and just trying to look for other places where we can just kind of like do a little bit better.
And the one thing that I will definitely credit you on with the PAX Premiere Second Edition is the fact that that little insert that comes out that has all of the
Blocks, yeah.
yeah, the blocks in it. That's awesome. Plus, it's functional in a sense that at a glance I can see, oh, there's a 3-piece lead, right? And it's simple. Don't overthink it, and it's really easy to put it back together. And it doesn't. Yeah, it.
Well, thank you.
Works really well for that.
When we talk about game accessibility, one of the things that I think there are a lot of useful and good ways of thinking about accessibility, but the one that I often think about is like, how fast is the game to set up? Like, does it lend itself to just like taking it out, and then how long does it take before you're actually playing it? Because there are some games that I really love that just take so long to set up, and they have to, and these are games I love. And actually, I think I went through a bit of a spree where I was playing a lot of 1889. One of the things I love about that game is that it sets up so quickly. And there are other games you think about like an Arkwright, a game I like a lot, or even like City of Big Shoulders, a game I like quite a bit. We kept finding ourselves playing 1889 because it was just like, well, we know we can set this up in like 3 minutes, and then we're going. And so, if I think about one unifying accessibility angle that I've been taking into all the projects I'm working on, it's like, how fast does it take to set this thing up?
And I think there's credit to that because there are games that, especially given what it is I do with the streaming of all of these and having to make sure it gets set up on the table, some of these are just difficult. Yeah. Time consuming, very much. And yeah, it's I'm glad to hear that there are publishers out there, because yes, designer / publisher in that regard, taking that into account. And I do want to piggyback on something that the folks in the Peanut Gallery are saying. And this is something that it may not be costs reasonable for publishers, because I don't know how easily available they are, but having baggies with holes already punched in them. I have a hole punch that is, that I call a snake bite hole punch, to where it is probably a millimeter punch. Like literally, it's a tiny little.
Interesting.
And the reason is that way you don't have to spend time squeezing out the air for every bag to be able to shrink it down. You don't have to even worry about that. It's a little thing, but it's that attention to detail.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
That's something that I do wish that publishers would, when they give baggies, that they have a little tiny little hole already pre-punched in it. But I bought a hole punch strictly for that, to be able to punch a hole in all the baggies. So
interesting. Well, that's good. Maybe it'll wind up in a game.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
That's a good idea.
All right. So let's go ahead and let's talk Oath. And then we'll double around to John Company. But Oath, you guys had a fairly successful Kickstarter. That's an understatement. Where are things now? I hear what you're saying on timeline-wise, but how? I also know that it is going through, as you mentioned, a lot of development work, play testing still. And are you, let me go about it this way. Are you beholden to the timeline that you set on Kickstarter because, damn it, we set that timeline on Kickstarter, we're going to abide by that? Or are you more willing to, if it ends up late, it ends up late because it's not the game that you want it and you think it can be? Which drives?
So I have no problem asking for time. I don't. Like, if ever we run into a project where I feel like we need a few more months, I have no qualms about asking for that time. And I've never gotten a sense from Patrick that like it would be an issue.
Good.
Part of that is the company's just been very lucky, and we have cash reserves so that we can really put time in things. That being said, I try when we're doing timelines to be very generous with them so that we have like we just have a good bank of time already, and a lot of that's been spent actually. So to go a little bit on the back end, Oath was always a game that we were going to try to deliver to our backers by either the end of year or Q1. Sometime in early Q1, that's what we put on the Kickstarter page. But in that timeline, we had maybe 2 or 3 months of development delay that we could take guilt-free. Like I didn't even have to ask for it. And that time has largely been taken. we've kind of moved it. So we're now at a part where everything is on schedule. It's going fine. There are a couple of things that could cause a small delay. But if we ever get to a point where we feel like we want to make a big revision or something, even late in a project, it doesn't bother me. So long as what would bother me is if I feel like it's not, I'm not exactly sure like where the design is going. Like if I lose a thread a little bit. And actually, Andy has a great point here that like we aren't linked to the
The big shows.
to the big shows. That isn't fully true because Gen Con is really, really, really huge for us. And especially if you want to ride the media cycle, you have to release a Gen Con for our audience. So there are certain titles that we've done that haven't been able to make Gen Con and that have hurt the game probably. Oath, though, when we were building our calendar, I was very careful about not linking it to any show, so that it was just another pressure that I knew I was not going to have to face. I have a cat playing with my computer wires, so if everything goes black, that's why. So with Oath, we've an interesting thing happened. So Oath has a very funny combat system. It's not really like any other combat system that I've seen in games. It wasn't supposed to be idiosyncratic, but it has to do a lot of different things in the design. And so because as you know, Edward, I like work backwards on a lot of these problems so that there was, I think one reason why people sometimes have a hard time playing my games is because as opposed to starting with like, it's dice drafting and then building from that, or like it's a worker placement game. Instead, I like, well, this particular pressure, if I use this kind of version of dice drafting, I can produce it. I'm like coming to the mechanisms very late, which is also why I'm always careful about recruiting new playtesters because I want them to know what they're signing up for, because the games can churn and change a lot over the course of their development on a mechanical level, so that if you really fell in love with like the worker placement part of the game, it could be gone, even though it seemed like
Right.
that was a really essential part of the design. So with Oath has this kind of funny campaign system, and I've never been like completely happy with it. It just works really well. It does everything it's supposed to do. It's incredibly expressive. If you just like in the kind of like I was watching some of your chat with Mark Herman, and I actually had talked to Mark about this when we were in San Diego together, and it does for all the different types of battles and campaigns that can be built in the game. This one system unifies all of them, but it's not quite as cute as like the root system. It lacks a little bit of that cuteness. And so about a month and a half ago, I said, okay, I might actually put a really big development pause and try to rebuild the combat system from scratch because I was sort of unhappy with it. And I put the game development on pause for a couple weeks, went very deep into the combat and mucked around a lot, and had planned on like, okay, well, am I going to delay this project 3 months to rebuild combat? And what ended up happening is it led to a couple of very small adjustments to the existing system, but we more or less kept the system intact.
Why?
Because it just worked. It was just better. It was just there are some times when you tear things down because you don't think they're working, and then in the process of building a replacement, you build the exact same house.
Okay.
Because I don't think I recognize the degree to which the existing system was doing really good work. And there were a couple of little adjustments that once I made those, it helped with some of the like, so, okay, well, I'll have to be specific to have this make any sense. when I'm doing a lot of development, I spend a lot of time thinking about like feel and tension and
Hmm.
like what is are you being put in a position where something feels like something else, right? Games are really good like at sympathy, and combat never felt like fighting was the problem. And there were just a couple of little screws that got tightened that even though the rules of the system didn't change very much, it made the battles feel more like a battle. And once that was solved, it didn't really matter that it wasn't the most clever system. Oh, it's got plenty of clever systems. It doesn't need another like little cute thing in the corner. And I think it really helped. I don't know. That pause though, I didn't have any hesitation to taking a few weeks to do this review. And it could have turned into a longer month thing. And at the end of the review, it was like, no, we can go back to it. I was happy I took that break, and maybe it delayed things a little bit, but we didn't mind too much.
So, on that note, now I'm not terribly well versed in Oath, full
Sure.
disclosure, but big picture wise, you said that even though it worked and it took care of a bunch of the things that you wanted it to, it didn't quite have the feel you wanted. There was just some little thing in the back of your head that was kind of gnawing at you, saying, "Hey, no, not quite." Did that pause and those little adjustments, did that put those to bed, or were there concessions to usability, but it's still not quite exactly how you wanted it?
It largely put those to bed. It's still like I think um, Oath is such a large design that no single system is going to work completely perfectly because they have to. It's sort of, I mean, Oath is sort of like four games that are all bound up in one game, and no one of those games is going to be absolutely precisely tuned. It can't be because
Why?
because it has to be modified not only by the other games that can happen in Oath, but also by this insanely large card list filled with modifications.
So it's
So like,
impossible to work through all the possible permutations, is what you're
well, I
saying,
mean,
right?
if I'm thinking about like the way we did Root, we set up the four Root factions and played through the opening two turns like dozens of times. There was such stability. Like when I think about what Root is, even with Root having a lot of different versions, we just really ran it through the gauntlet of like understanding exactly how setup should be. Should there not be a cat in that opposite clearing? Should there be, maybe two cats back at the keep? Whatever. We went through a lot of different iterations and were able to make very, very fine adjustments when it came to core systems. With Oath, because the core game is built to be modified and built to adapt, it has to be a little bit looser. And I think part of what was happening is I would play a game like Innis, which is a game I love a lot. I think it's brilliant,
Hmm.
and I admire so much about the tightness of that design. Um, and I would say, man, I wish that the combat in Oath could be as tight as a battle in Innish. But it can't, because in Oath, uh, the battle system needs to handle like a daring night raid where you steal like a mirror, and it also needs to handle a campaign where you take over half the world, and it needs to do both of those things in a single roll. And
That's not
it,
asking for much.
right, so and like, okay, if it's a little rules intensive, well, it's doing a lot of like lifting. Um, and I so yeah, I think I'm quite happy with it. I also think that pause did help me get some perspective on what was working and what was not working, and trying to tighten it up. I mean, I think in general, I mean, Oath is in a really funny spot, and I'll just say for folks who haven't been following the development of the game, we're very close to being done with it. I would say that we probably have like 3 weeks or 4 weeks of development left. The changes that we're making now in development are so comically small.
So let me pause on that. How can you put that kind of a timeline? How do you know like it's going to be 3 to 4 weeks, like as opposed to I have no idea. Like how do you put that time frame on it?
Well,
Because
you get a sense. I mean, so part of it is just I'm the only I'm only able to forward project because I can think about how long it's taken to get to this point. So maybe the best example would be like the game's card list. So Oath has about 200 cards that are unique. It has a lot more than 200 cards, but it has 200 like game cards, denizen cards. Every card is different, and they are wild. In fact, one of the conceits of Oath is that the cards in Oath are dramatic. If a card is in your game, the whole game is gonna feel its presence.
Okay.
I haven't found quite the right way to even explain this, but they are so much more important than a card in Pamir or Porfiriana or Renaissance. Like a card in like a lot of the PAX games, my own one included, spent a lot of time thinking about like card flow. The cards kind of move through the engine of the game. You use them in one way or another. And in Oath, the cards stick around. And a card could totally change a core rule of the game. So, for instance, there's a card that's a gambling hall that allows you to dice for money in Oath. Now, in games where the gambling hall is out, players get access to extremely risky push your luck strategies that would never exist in the game if the gambling hall weren't in play. And so that one card, it could stick around for many generations of play, many games of Oath, and we'll mark those games. Likewise, we have some cards in Oath that allow for certain parts of the game to be negotiated, for resources to transfer. When those
Whereas
games
normally that wouldn't be the case,
but
right?
normally it wouldn't happen. And so,
Okay.
we had a game today in the office where I was playing as the Chancellor, and Nick was playing as a citizen, and he was going to usurp me, and he had the succession goal, so he was going to knock me off my throne. So we had been kind of like in a bad marriage the whole game. But I gathered enough political capital, and I exiled him. I kicked him out of the kingdom. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Patty had discovered a relic, which was the proof of nobility, which is sort of like a buy-in into the kingdom. Now, normally, Patty would not be able to do anything with this proof of nobility if she didn't want to join. But because there was a market card, she was able to go to that market and sell it to Nick, who was able to buy his way back in, and then Patty used that money to advance her own position. Now, like that, it just tilts the whole game. So we have to build systems that are like a little loose on purpose. And so Oath, I mean, well, kind of not rounding it out, but Oath has been a very fun and strange project to work on because I feel like designers and people who make things always say this. Like I really do deeply believe that I have no idea how well it's going to do. But what I do know is that it is very much the thing that we wanted to make. It is a
Mission accomplished at that point, though, right?
it is a completely wild game that has no guardrails. Like the strangest things happen in that game, and it is on the. And while that's true, it's also very strategic. It really rewards people who are able to create a plan that's going to take several turns to execute, sort of develop different different contingencies.
Have another
And
drink. It's okay. Go
that's all
ahead.
right.
No.
All right, I'll drink up. So it combines this, like, kind of my two favorite things about game design, which is it is this very expressive and narratively rich system that rewards, on the one hand, a lot of planning and thinking, but on the other hand, is very narrative first and understands that things are very often not fair, and sometimes a strange thing is going to happen. So it's like pretty relentlessly old school in its design philosophy. And I have no idea how it's going to do. We were doing some cost estimates on the back end, and our production manager asked me, like, oh, well, like, what do you think this game might do over its life or over a section of it? And I was like, I have no idea. It's one of those things that, like, I'll be very happy if we sell through the first run. I'm just delighted I was
Hold
able to
on.
spend so much
Stop.
time on
Stop.
it.
Hold on. Now, I don't know how big the first run is going to be, but based on the Kickstarter numbers, plus the fact
Yeah,
that it has Cole Wehrle and Leader Games behind it, stop.
but it also,
I
like,
mean, I know you're being genuine, but come on.
no, but I want to be. I'm trying to be exceptionally earnest on this point. I think Oath was not a safe game for us to do. We could have done another Root Kickstarter. I could have made a game like Root, but different. You know what I mean? Like I could have taken like a half step away from the things that I know work and I know will sell. But one of the things for me when I'm working on design that is like the absolute centerpiece is the design has to feel like urgent. It has to feel like if you don't do it, no one's going to do it. And one of the things about Oath is when I was pitching it to Patrick, I was like, okay, the development budget for this game is probably going to be higher than any Fantasy Flight project. The art budget is like going to be similar. This is not, and the project itself is deeply risky because it's not using those resources towards like a franchise game.
Sure, I hear you.
But so and all this is to say, I made it very clear to the rest of the team that we had to go into this project with the expectation that it might not do well after. Like it could have a fine first run. The backers could be happy, and then maybe it won't find its audience. But we will have still made the thing.
See, now hold on. I love you, Cole. You and I are good friends. But hold on one second, okay? If you had made this argument 3 years ago, 5 years ago, I'd buy that 100%. And I don't think you're being disingenuous. Understand that. But here's where I disagree with you. Is, again, you have such a track record right now. Now, you have a track record with my audience that is nearly flawless. Because when I say, no, hear me. You have an infamous traffic with Hollenspiel that is not a massive seller because Hollenspiel, it's just not going to reach. John Company isn't going to reach a huge audience, right? But then you have Root, and then you have PAX Premier Second Edition, which has been a huge success. Relatively speaking, your name now is synonymous with this dude, whatever the hell he does, I'm going to check out. You have gotten that clout to where and this is to separate you or to take you apart from Leader Games. But when then you take the reputation of Cole Wehrle and you put it together with Leader Games, who has Root, which is one of the biggest franchises, it feels like, in our board gaming hobby, not named Gloomhaven and all of its, in Frosthaven and all that. Where I strongly disagree with you is this. Oath is going to crush. There's no doubt in my mind. However, if Oath doesn't resonate with people, your next one is where that might come into play. It's not this one. That's just my opinion on this. But
and I like the way I often think about it is a line from a Politico that I'll keep unnamed. But I feel like I've accumulated some capital, and now I'm going to spend it.
Yes, that's exactly what you're doing. I hear that.
I think that I try to be very. I try to be very self-aware of this because I feel like there are all these traps that you fall into if you stop thinking. If you start. I never want to approach a game from the perspective of I want this game to sell X well.
I don't think anybody thinks you do that either.
No. Well, I know, but that doesn't matter what they think as long as I actually don't.
Fair point.
and I've gotten to know a lot of folks in the industry, and it's a type of thinking that it's really common. And for obvious reasons, everyone wants to keep their job. This is the best job in the world, and it doesn't. The job doesn't get any easier, but it's something that I'm always suspicious of, and so I'm always careful, and I try to hedge my bets around projects like this. And that's things like not overprinting or over leveraging a new property like Oath, letting it see how many people want it, and then doing our best to service it right. And it's not like we're not creating scarcity. We're just being careful.
So, okay, let me ask on that point, because yes, you are a designer, but you also play a big part on the publishing side within Leader Games, and obviously within Whirligig Games as well. But talking about a much bigger print run with anything that Leader does than with Whirligig going forward. However, how do you balance that? Because, again, I understand that you are apprehensive, I guess is the right word, and not wanting to be like, I'm Cole Wehrle, what up? And you're going to buy my game no matter what. I understand that. How do you balance? Because you look at what happened with Root, print run after print run, to satisfy demand. How do you balance that print run guesstimate with the unknown, even with Kickstarter? How do you do that?
That is a hard. So first, I'll say that Leader is for folks who aren't super familiar with the company, is very horizontal. Patrick has Patrick, who's our owner, and the kind of like he is involved in all things relating to the company.
Sure.
I can't think of a single title that would capture all the things he does, but he has a very open door and will allow kind of everybody to be at these meetings. So when we're having meetings about print run, it's actually only now, I feel like only in the past 6 months, the company has grown large enough that I feel like I'm not asked about print run anymore, which is great. It's great because I don't know. I mean, I can guess. My guess for Root were very wrong. Um, but usually, we'd have these meetings where we say, okay, here are our projections. Here's how we're going to figure it out. You kind of think about like, what is the strength of the outflow? Like how many can you just kind of move through and into these different channels? It's a lot simpler with Whirligig because we sell direct. And so we have like the Kickstarter direct channel, the BackerKit direct channel, and then our storefront.
And for those listening, Whirligig is PAX Premier Second Edition as of right now, and then we'll talk about John Company.
Yeah, we'll do the other ones. But it and Whirligig is just myself and my brother.
Right.
But because we have so much control over our sales pipeline, it's not that hard to estimate copies, and we also aren't.
Why?
Well, because they're only coming from one spot. Like what I think people don't realize, if a game goes out of stock really quickly, what might have happened is that a new publisher published a game, and maybe they printed 5,000 copies, which is for a new publisher a lot of copies. Maybe they sold 2,000 of them or 1,000 of them, and they printed 5,000, and it's a hit. Now, a distributor has access to all these stores, and they might call up the publisher and say, hey, I want to buy 3,000 of your copies. And then, the new publisher is very excited by this, and they of course say yes. And now, now they're out, and they can't sell any direct, and they've actually just made a huge mistake because they would have made a lot more money selling them direct. Than
cutting out the middleman, i.e., distributor. Right. Yeah.
That's just kind of like how it can go.
Right.
And then with Whirligig, we use, and this is with Premier, we use very few distributors, basically none. And so we just have a lot of control over our retail pipeline, and it allows us to like look at what's the average like how many copies are selling each day, and we can average that over the month, and we can project it over the year, and we can work on our little model. With something like Leader, which is a little bit more like your traditional publisher, that gets very complicated because the copies are going in a lot of directions and all over the world. So I'm quite glad to not be trying to guess how many copies that we're going to sell of something, because I just don't know enough. I'm way too bound up in a lot of the creative projects. I'm trying to like figure out how we cycle this back. So we were thinking about like, how well is Oath going to do? We really don't know. I mean, and I think there's this question about, you never know the true size of your audience. You always have ideas about it, but it's very difficult to know like what is the true size and how much can they support us, right? And so
this resonates really well with me as well. Yeah, it really does.
Even when you have feedback systems like a Patreon or like, if you run a Kickstarter, you still kind of don't know.
Yep.
And so it's really funny. I mean, I don't know. I'll speak kind of in generalizations. The number of backers at a Kickstarter who are going to be in common from all the projects you do, I'm a pretty cautious person when it comes to those kinds of estimations. And we actually ran the numbers to figure out like, okay, well, how many people did back, these projects or those projects? It's so much lower than you think. I'm not going to say numbers because, but it's just a lot lower. So that core cohort is a lot smaller than you realize, but it's also more complicated because you have people who like, John bought a copy of Game A, and then Game B came around, and his friend Julie bought a copy, and they're in the same group. And so, like, if you're counting it in groups, you can kind of make a better map, but there's no real easy way to figure out how to do that. So, for this reason, even an experienced publisher is going to make some, slight incorrect guesses.
Sure, yeah, because you can't know. Right? Even with the Kickstarter, okay, you sell X amount of copies, but then you want to make a print run that is bigger than that because you want to be able to sell that other than just to the Kickstarter backers. And you kind of like what you said, sell direct as well as to distributors. That's a hard number to judge, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Even
you
with
just
the
don't.
experience.
And I think people don't like when folks are complaining about Root not being everywhere or Wingspan not being everywhere. I don't think they realize the degree to which um, cash flow in a game company has peaks and valleys. And so with Root, there was never a question about how much Root to print because we've always printed the most that we could possibly afford to print. And that might mean that, I mean, we just can only put so much money on the boat at once. It's, otherwise it gets irresponsible. Um, and so there's just a kind of funny thing that happens where it's like, well, we are printing it about as fast as we can. And that's still happening. I mean, it's mild out a little bit, or stabilized maybe is the better way to think about it. But for Drew and I, when we were doing Premiere, which has been doing really well for us, when it came to the second edition, which speaking of badly guessing how well a Kickstarter is going to do, Drew and I were like, we thought it was going to do like a fourth of what it did. That was our excited, like, oh, cool. This will be a little gap printing. It'll round out. We had no idea the second printing was going to be so much bigger than the first printing. But we decided to just kind of like print as many as we could responsibly do. And if it meant that we had an extra 1,000 we had to hold on to for a few years or keep in a garage or something,
It
fine.
keeps the ship afloat. Whirligig
Yeah.
isn't going to go away
Well,
in that case, right?
and I
Yeah.
think people sometimes get scared where they want to like dump their inventory. And you should almost never do that because it will just destroy the value of your
Yeah,
thing.
of course. Yep.
But it's something that a lot of game companies do. But that's very that's very counter to what I mean. The projects that I work on, I really want them like they're just I really dislike the idea of I think something strange happens to the relationship between the creative team and the project when a game goes on like ultra deep discount. Right. And I understand that there's an economic necessity for that to happen sometimes, but the way that people value the projects, we try to keep our, we don't discount Root. And we don't do that because we want to make sure that like, no, this is a game that cost this much to make. And it was the work of this creative team. And this is what it costs for us to keep doing it. And, the world where we're like, oh, this is the cheap Root or whatever is like just not a game that we want to play.
Good on you. I think the inherent value of the created or the creation that you made, it's worth this to us, and that's what we're going to sell it at. I'm okay with that. I mean, but I mean, you look at other games that I'm sure you're familiar with, like with Splatter stuff. People ask why. Well, I'm sure that some of that comes into play as well. So let's talk John Company a little bit with Whirligig. For those that are unfamiliar with it, originally, well, here, you do it.
Okay, I'll do it. So John Company was the last game I did for Sierra Madre Games. It's a wild economic sandbox about the British East India Company that starts in the early 18th century and goes to the mutiny and the dissolution of the company. It's an economic game, but it's an economic game that is like very deeply historical. And if you've played Infamous Traffic, it riffs on a similar note. I really think of Infamous Traffic and John Company as being two sides of a similar project. They're both about respectability in England. They're both about the British Empire. They're both extremely critical of colonial and imperial projects. And they look at those projects through the lens of a bunch of British families trying to gain cultural and social capital in England. So you go out to you really can't understand what happened in India or what happened in China until you understand what was happening in Kensington and in other parts of London. So I did it. John Company was done at the very end of my dissertation. I was teaching and writing in Austin. It was like mostly designed in 2017 and 2016. And then I published it. And right before it came out, I got hired at Leader and we did Root. Like Root's Kickstarter went up at the same time John Company was being shipped. So it was like sort of like the last of the historical projects I did. And I'm really happy with how it turned out, but it was also, I have never been as busy or as tired as when I was working on John Company.
Why?
Well,
because of everything that you had going on?
Well, I was working on this dissertation. We were getting ready to move to leave Austin. I had a class I was teaching that was very difficult. We had just had kid number 2. There were a lot of things kind of swirling around it. We didn't know. I was so used to this, we had basically the birth of kid 2 had ruined all of our finances because there's some medical things, which is fine. That it's not fine, but it happened.
It's life. Sure. I hear you.
It was just one of those things that like there was no getting around it.
Right.
And my wife and I had no idea what the future might hold. I mean, I thought at one point, well, I'm just going to get a job at a bank or something. Like I had no idea. And we were working on John Company during this strange time. And I actually finished it. I delayed my dissertation defense a couple months to finish John Company because I told my advisor that I might never get to make another game again. And I have this chance of getting it ready in time for Essen. And I didn't really care if my dissertation was going to be 4 months late or something. And so
because it was going to happen no matter what, right?
Well,
it was going to
get happen.
done.
It was just like a matter of priority, and it wasn't hard to scare up the funding for the little bridge. I was lucky to go to a pretty well-funded program, and the game came out, but it was a very weird release. Normally, when a game comes out, I feel like I get to be quite hands on deck about all the rules questions and how it's received. With John Company, that wasn't true because we were running the Root Kickstarter at that moment, and then I was getting ready to throw myself into Root. So Root didn't really quite exist. So with John Company, even though I was really happy with how the design turned out, I wish I could have spent a little bit longer on it. And I think that there are just a couple of places where I was always like, if I get a chance to redo this or get some, or if I attack a similar area on a future project, I just have these like scattered notes that I want.
So, okay, how does that differ with what you're doing with John Company with the new edition, new version? I'll let you frame that. How does that differ from between the original PAX Premier and PAX Premier Second Edition, to where, in my opinion, those are two different games. They are on the same subject. They have some mechanical similarities, but they are apples and giraffes.
Don't worry, Giuseppe. I will improve the solo. This is a great question. So they are. The two editions of Premiere are very different from one another. And I think sometimes when I see people write about them online, I know what has happened is they just haven't played the first one in a really long time. And the second version is coloring it, but they're very different games. With Premiere, what happened, I think, was I had a thing I wanted to do with the game, but I did not fully understand the form I was working in. And the project kind of drifted away from me.
What do you mean you didn't know the form you were working in?
Well, it was my first game, and Phil was a great developer, but also there
Phil
were times...
Eklund we're talking about.
Yeah, Phil Eklund was a great developer, but also there were times when I listened to him and maybe I shouldn't have, and there were times when I should have listened to him and I didn't.
Okay.
So that goes both ways. And I'm happy with how the game turned out. It landed, but it really was not what I had originally imagined that game would look or feel like to play.
Okay.
When we were going into Premiere, I had a very clear. So what happened is Premiere got an expansion called Kyber Knives, which I'm also quite proud of. But one of the things that happened after Kyber Knives is I started trying to fix some of the problems that I had with the design. And these aren't like, this isn't the Halifax Hammer. These aren't like problems. They were like, it was more like issues of like palette and proportion. Like there were just places where I thought like, this ear is too big, or like this emotional note isn't quite working out very well. And what happened with Premiere was when I was working Kyber Knives, I realized at the very end of Kyber Knives that I couldn't fix Premiere because I couldn't fix it with the expansions, because expansions are always additive. And if I really wanted to fix Premiere in the way I wanted to, I had to completely rebuild everything. And so, I mean, there was a moment where I have a photo somewhere of it where I posted on Twitter. People can probably look it up, where I laid out all the Premiere cards on the table and just started like blocking things together and moving things around to sort of build it into the game that it is. With John Company is a little trickier because a lot of the core systems of John Company are fine. So with Premiere, it was almost an issue of like resetting the foundations and building a whole second thing. With John Company, a lot of like the core math of the game is fine. It's working like really, really well.
When you say fine, it is doing what
Good.
it is
Yeah,
that you intended it to do.
It is structurally sound.
Okay.
And it was funny when Drew and I first started looking at John Company. I made a few kind of big structural changes just to see, and within like a day of playtesting, it was very clear that we needed to roll things back to John Company because actually, if you make a ship cost that. Wait, my son's calling me. Hello, Owen. That's amazing. Good work.
That's awesome.
Okay, you might get to meet my sons. Do you guys want to say hi?
Absolutely. Bring him on.
Okay, wait. This is Auden. Say hi, Auden.
Hi, Auden.
Okay, and then you can go up to mommy now, buddy. And this is Owen.
Oh, bigger one. Hey, what's up? Nice jersey. Tell him Minecraft.
Very nice shirt. He loves your shirt.
Yep.
All right. Oh, you beat the giant bear. Okay, can you tell mom I'm still talking?
You're fine. You're totally fine. So I have this to look forward to down the road with what will eventually be my stepkids. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So
they're wonderful. They're playing Lovers in a Dangerous Space Time upstairs, which is a great game for to play with kids. So with John Company, there were these like many of the structural elements were fine, but there was some places where the form factor of the game wasn't allowing me to do certain things. So like the fact that the board had to be shaped in a certain way, the fact that the rule book had to be so long, this long. The event system in John Company, for instance, is completely built around the fact that I had about 200 different events that I needed to fold into only 8 cards. So like, there's like some scrappy innovation that was happening during John Company that was just like, okay, I really need this system to exist, but I can only have like a single deck of bridge cards.
Sure.
What can we do with this single deck? And I think that there are some like funny things about the form factor. It's like a little hard to set up because so for example, John Company opens with a kind of weird snake draft. The proper way of doing setup is to have setup cards which you shuffle then deal out to generate random setup positions. But we just didn't have cards. I just didn't have any cards that I could.
And does this, I'm curious, does this go back to the whole weight ramifications with it being a Sierra Madre game, which is based in Germany, there was a certain weight requirement that they had that it had to meet, right?
If you stick your copy of John Company on the scale, it'll be like 1 kilogram exactly.
Right. And that has to do with shipping costs, right? Right?
Yeah. It just
okay.
Those were all DHL, like worldwide shipping costs.
Yes.
And so there were basically in like the length of the rule book, the size of the box, all that stuff. You're fine, Katie. All of those things were kind of like bound up, and so there were all these very constrictions on how the design looked. So originally, when Drew and I started looking at John Company, the thing that we were most sensitive to is, can we build a game with like an upgrade pack that just rounds out a few of those systems, that fills in the gaps, maybe that does a different solo system. And that's been our strategy for most of the development. And then recently we've started to get a little more ambitious and to ask ourselves like, okay, if we were to like revisit a few of the game's core systems, in more along the lines of Premiere, so like it's a little bit less like in addition to a house as like than a renovation.
Okay.
Right. So like, what if we're going to keep the bones of the house intact, but we're going to really pull stuff out. We're going to move this bedroom around. And so, for instance, we're like kind of changing. So, okay, one of my favorite rules in the original game is the nepotism rule, which says that I can promote myself in a hiring decision, but for everybody I pass up, I have to like give a bauble. I have to give
Right.
a
Yep.
promise.
Yep.
Which I've always liked that rule, and it was a clean solution to a big problem. But as we have made the company's hiring more interesting, we actually just don't need it. And what's happened is there are kind of two types of hiring that happen in the game. And for the general hiring, you're just not allowed to hire your own family if you can avoid it. And then for promotions, you can of course pick yourself. And like so, it has a lot of the same effect, and it's hard to see how that system will operate. Because I'm describing something that nobody's played, so it's hard to get
No, you're doing fine.
clear.
It gives
But
people a little bit of context, and I think that's fine. So you're
well,
fine.
or I'll give another example. So the way shipyards work, um, the so John Company is a little funny about its history when it comes to ships in the East India Company, because most ships that were owned by the East India Company were leased essentially from shipbuilding families, and they'd be leased on extremely long terms, like 20 years or something. And then the ship would go back. It might be rebuilt or refitted, maybe even given the same name. It'd go back out on another lease. So what we wanted to do, and this is a thing that we're experimenting with, is reducing the total numbers of ships in the game, giving them names, and then making the shipyards less like a steady drip of new ships than a lease on the Excelsior or something. Then you have that.
How does that change the mechanism, though? How does that change the feel of the game?
So what it allows us to do is slightly rejigger the game's core economy so that shipyards provide a steady drip of income, because the company is paying each ship owning family $1 to lease that ship. And then we slightly refigure the orders to make up for that difference, so it doesn't really impact the larger game economy. But it means that the shipyards are these steady streams of income. Now, why this is useful is one of the things that we're attempting to do is really build out the deregulated game, which is my favorite part of John Company, is when you play when the company doesn't have a monopoly of trade.
Which the majority of people don't play.
I've never played.
Right.
Like my biggest...
Myself included, I have never played this version of the game. So, okay, even though it's in the box, I just haven't.
Oh, yeah, it is... one of the most, I probably should have started here, Edward. One of the most frustrating things for me about John Company is that the post-monopoly scenario and the company under siege scenario are the best parts of the game, and no one has played them. And so what we wanted to do is we're going back and we're like making the early company scenario a little bit faster, and we're also making it so that you can play kind of like the early company scenario, or you can play the post-company scenario, but the scenarios also bleed into each other in a way that's very clean and doesn't involve a lot of like extra cards. So if you want to play a game and you're really having a good time, you're like, you know what, let's keep going. And here's how we introduce deregulation normally. This is the core rule by which it can happen. Now, in order to do that, we've had to do things like refigure how the company credit system works, make it have hooks in to allow the company to deregulate. And then look for ways to make the private firm rules behave a little bit more like the company from a rules perspective, so that it's not so jarring. You're not having to read a whole nother set of rules when it comes to private firms.
So let me finish that thought, and then we'll double back. You're fine.
I'll say about that. So when it comes to ships, if you have a captain in John Company, which is a privately owned ship, the captain generates $2 for being a captain, and then the company has to pay $1 out of the game for the theft of time, because this captain is like trading on his own business. Now, what we can do now is say, well, actually, all ships cost $1. This is the universal leasing fee, and it's always going to be paid into the families that own those ships. And then if you also fully own the ship, which is like having a captain, the company's paying $1 to the ship, the shipbuilder, and then $2 to the family, and it's behaving like the way it's going to behave in all the other different corners of the game. Now, this has led, and I'll just kind of round this out, and then I'll take your question, but this has led to some funny things, which is like the goods economy doesn't really need to exist in the game anymore, because the goods economy has been weirdly outmoded by making the ship economy more robust. And so instead of having goods that you're shipping to India, which was always like a little anachronistic, and I could talk for like an hour about why the goods were in John Company and why they also shouldn't have been.
I love you.
Uh,
Yeah.
I but thanks. But still have factories. They just don't work like ships. They don't look like, because one of the confusing parts about John Company is like you have goods and then you have ships, and they look different. They behave the same way, kind of, with this other exception. And so what we've done is say, okay, there are factories. They behave totally differently than ships. You're not gonna, you don't put them on a boat to India, but they do generate money in this certain way, and they will generate different amounts of money depending on the strength of the trade of India. Because the idea is, if the trade in India is very strong, then the factories you own in England are going to be doing very badly because they're going to compete against Indian textiles. And so it allows me to like really underline some of the critical tensions between people working on the manufacturing side, folks who are invested in the company, and things like that.
All right, so I have a few questions that are going to be a little bit more broad, but speaking specifically about John Company, that I imagine other people have the same questions now. Now that you've gone over this in depth and you talk about your favorite aspects of John Company and no one plays it, question number one, why? Like, why do you think that is, number one? And on the second part of that is, why don't you make that the key? Why don't you make that the game, and then the lesser good part of the game be the alternate, if that makes sense?
No, that's a very reasonable question. So what I want to do with this version is, so the reason why people don't play it is because the early company scenario is about 40 minutes too long. I mean, it's almost like a dumb thing to say. It's so simple, but like the early company scenario is just a little bit too long and just a little bit too mentally difficult to track, so that it tends to exhaust groups. And the groups that do like it want to keep playing it, right? So you get into this funny spot where you're like, oh, I like the early company scenario. I want to keep getting good at it. But it is so robust that it feels like an endpoint. Like there's no reason to watch the extended version.
But I
Right?
feel like you're not. Maybe I didn't convey the question well, so let me try this a different way. Why is the version of John Company that I and most everyone else has played, why is that the main part? Why is that the game as opposed to the other stuff being the main part of the game? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because it's because John Company is complicated and it's scary to jump into the deep end and to do it all, right? Like I would be hesitant to teach somebody 1860 or 1856 first, because they both involve company like government buyouts or buy-ins, nationalizations, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
And so I want to like start on 89 or start on a 46 or something, so that they can get the hang of it.
Okay, so you
And
made
then
the main part of John Company that we have played is the
it's the
entry
tutorial.
level, right?
Yeah, it's the tutorial, it's like it's a little crazy to think of it that way. But I really think that with just a couple small adjustments, it can smooth the transition between the early company scenario and then like just playing the full thing.
So with the new version, then, are you keeping it as is, in a sense that the main game, the intro game, if you will, is still going to be the core thing that we are learning, and then from there you go scenarios, so that isn't changing?
Yeah, I think that the general approach was sound. Like you have to start with the early company scenario, and then you have this option of just, so basically I'm imagining a 3-play teaching arc, which is very presumptuous, but I'm imagining
That's ambitious because,
Yeah,
but then again, the people that are going to be interested in John Company are going to be the people willing to do that. Your
right.
target audience will be on board with
So
that,
yeah,
whereas,
so the way I'm thinking about it is like the way the 3-play intro works is you've got the base game. Here's how the company works. Here's how the East India Company works. Then you have the private firm game. Here's how private companies work. And then the third game is, here is how you trigger the formation of the second game. Here's the door that opens from the first game to the second game, so that you can just start playing it and you're like, okay, now we have the door. So here we are playing the intros. So it's a little different than just saying like the beginner game. because what it is it's the beginner game, but there's this door. And if anybody opens that door, we're now playing game B. And so it's not like it isn't quite like, what is an Arkwright? Is it called the water frame or something?
No, that's the advanced version, which in my
That's
opinion is the main version. But
is the
yes,
game.
right.
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit different than that because water frame supersedes a lot of elements of the base game, whereas the deregulated game just adds on a whole sphere of play.
Okay.
That players have to like, oh, now we're playing on Earth and on Mars at the same
So
time.
in a sense that, not going to call it an expansion, but like how you said, expansions are always additive, right?
Yeah, completely. And so our hope is, I think one reason why people have a hard time, I think there are a lot of just like obvious points of friction. It's a 5-hour game or a 4-hour game if you're playing the early company scenario, and so maybe you just
In the current iteration, you're saying,
no,
right?
in the old game. In the old game, the
Yeah.
early company scenario.
That's what I mean by current the version we have, right? Yeah.
It's just it's a lot of work to get pretty deep into it, and by making a few things a little bit more elegant and a little bit easier, I can put more emphasis on the part of the game I want people to really get into and get comfortable with.
Okay.
Because John Company works, for people who have played the deregulated game, it is like 18xx, the like parlor role-playing game. It just has, because you're kind of in the same like mental space as an 18xx game, but there are no rules. You can just be like, well, I'll do this if you give me 30% of your company. And you're like, well, I guess I'm okay. And there are rules to build that, and you can find a sneaky way of taking control of someone else's firm, and you can bet it all on a trade mission to some region of India and then lose all the boats. But one of the things that we're really sensitive to is there are these problems in the design in the game that you all have right now. I'm very sorry to say. There are some problems with the deregulated game where it becomes like a little stupid sometimes. In certain situations, it's a place that if we would have played it a lot more, I think we would have run into those as development problems and fixed them. But there are just a few places where I'm like, man, a little bit more polish could have taken this a long way. And so we are building, and maybe this is the clean way to think about what we're doing to the design. Drew and I are starting with the full game. And then we are making sure everything works, is elegant, everybody behaves by the same rules, and then we'll quarantine. We'll section things off and rearrange
Work
them.
backwards, which is it's the way Cole Wehrle works.
Yeah, but I'm like, like I am trying to. John Company, when we were building it, was not built that way. It was really built like just brick at a time all the way up to the very end. Mm-hmm. And when we got to the end, it was like, well, there were some things that if we applied that logic earlier, it would have built a different looking house. So, I mean, the short version with John Company is that it's still so John Company. It's just it's so itself. But there are all of these little things. So I'll give you another example. And this stuff, by the way, this game's in development. This could all change like tomorrow.
Understood. Look, Drew you are not beholden to this conversation. You're okay.
What are they going to say? Drew's going to come up to Minnesota to visit next week. And
by the way, send my best to Drew and everything there, please.
I certainly will. I think Drew and I both miss con season and getting to see everybody.
Seriously, that's the only thing I really, really miss about going to conventions.
It's like summer camp for the folks in the chat. It really is. Like, I want to sit on my phone, which again is crazy privilege, but that's where it is. So an example from John Company, the prizes in John Company I love, but there is like a game where all the prizes are cheap is just not as good as a game where there is an even spread through all the prizes. So what we're thinking about doing with John Company is creating like 4 or 5 prize tiers and printing those on the board and saying, look, cheap prize, it's worth this many points, it costs this much money to get, and going up. And then for the higher tiered prizes, you will get to draw privilege cards, which could be special powers, effects, have some of the flavor of the original game's prize cards. And the idea here is this is less overall rules, but it has a more specific punch to it, because now it's like, oh, this is a card that is like a marriage to an American's planter's daughter that will cancel your debt if you get this card, so it's worth something. And then one of the other governing modes that is informing Drew and I's work is there should be more things for negotiation in general.
You do love that, don't you?
I love, well, and John Company, it was always funny. They're like, well, you can't actually give me that. And in this game, it's like you want to sell your shipyards to another player, do it. You want to give somebody your
don't protect players from themselves.
Yeah, I'm not going to protect players from themselves. So
right.
we're really like anything. In fact, one of the big places this is happening is the way company shares are going to end up working, which is in the previous game, you could just buy company shares. There was like a limitless pool of them, and the money would go straight to the company. That isn't how it works anymore. Now, when the chairman creates debt, it will create shares that are owned by the Bank of England or by private shareholders. And then in the family phase, you can buy those shares. They can be auctioned. You can also buy shares from each other. And the money doesn't go to the company. The company's already been paid for those shares. It goes to the person who owns those shares.
I mean, the shareholder, it makes sense if you're selling your share. Yeah.
So what suddenly happens is that little track that we had in the first game that would like track the company's share price, it's not needed because the share price can be dynamic.
Sure. It's whatever you say it is, and it's the price that somebody's willing to pay, right?
Right. So it is just, maybe a share in the company is worth a rotten borough in the suburbs of London, or maybe it's worth a nice house, or maybe it's worth this like stack of cash, or the promise of a promotion or something. And so in order to put more things in negotiation, we've had to make a few decisions. One of them, and this, I don't know if this is going to hold, but this is an example of like how strange we are thinking. So we simplified a little bit of the company structure, slightly. But then we've also done a thing where I think negotiations are only going to happen in the family phase. Or rather, the transfer of resources only happens in the family phase. In the company phase, you can table talk. No one's going to stop you. But you can only transfer promises. And that's partly because one of the things that will happen in John Company sometimes, and I know there are groups that like this, and it's something I'm keeping an eye on, is that the company phase can become so burdened by a specific negotiation that players lose the flow of the game and the thread. Because it's like, okay, I'm going to give you $3 this turn. I'll give you $4 that turn. I'll promise you this ownership. Now will you buy my good over his good? And it's like, well, we wasted like 10 minutes of time.
Right.
For a very inconsequential negotiation. It would be much better if we could say, hey, I'll give you a promise. I'll give you 3 promises. And then when you go to the family phase, that's when players are having to like zero out their promises. And so kind of like, so that's when all those things are going to come, are going to come to account. Thank you, Andy. I promise you my heart's in the right place for this.
So,
can I answer one?
Oh, yeah. Go for it.
From Cole, who I met at BGG-Con and was happy to know. So how deregulation happens now is if the company takes emergency loans, so if it ever can't pay its bills, it kind of like toggles a switch. And any turn that the company can't pay its bills, during the Parliament section, any player can call for deregulation and they put it to a vote. But it's like if the company is struggling, no matter anything else about the company's state, a player can rap on the table and say, okay, after this law, we're voting on the deregulation of the company. And I think one of the things I like about this is not only is it much more historically accurate, it captures the like real fear that if just the tiniest thing went wrong in the company, it could lose its monopoly. And from a game shape perspective, one of the things that happens in John Company right now that's a little unfortunate is that the company will oftentimes deregulate in death spirals, where it's like the game is getting a little less interesting and it's doing its most interesting thing and its least interesting thing at the same time. And now there are scenarios where a very strong company can be forced into deregulation, or a very weak company might be saved by it. And there are lots of places in the middle.
So without getting too deep into the weeds then, my question is going back to the history of what was going on in your real world life during the development and publishing of John Company. Why did you want to revisit it? What's the main driving factor? I mean, you could give me, I wanted to change this little thing, but big picture, Why John Company? Why did you feel you needed to do that or wanted to do that or fill in the right word?
Well, I mean, so I've outlined some of the design reasons why it's interesting, but you're right. I haven't really addressed like why we're doing it. I mean, there are lots of interesting things that we choose not to do. Um, I think it's because I can.
Okay.
Like with Pamir, I knew that there were a lot of people who had played Root who were going to look for copies of Pamir, and I really wanted them to find a game that wowed them, that did right by the material and by the strength of the design, and that was something that I could like guard and curate.
Okay.
Which is why Drew and I started the company, which is why we do what we do. And for John Company, it's sort of the same way. I have the bandwidth, and a lot of this is made possible because of Drew. Drew is for Whirligig. Drew handles the business side of the company. He helps me a lot with development. We are very much like equal partners in the company.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him originally, he was like, well, like what percentage of the company should you have versus me? I said, no. This is a 50-50 thing. And you might think you're getting a good deal, and I might think I'm getting a good deal, and you might think it doesn't matter. It's 50-50. We're going to build us around this like very clean split of the company. And it's going to allow us to take on these kinds of projects. So, I wanted, if I didn't have my brother or if we didn't have Whirligig, there's a world where I might be trying to do a new edition through Phil, or maybe just do a curatorial, like, here are the rulings for the outstanding notes.
Keep going. We'll get to all the other questions.
Okay,
keep
cool.
going.
Yeah,
Keep
I'm sorry.
going. Keep going.
I just saw it was a very
I
good
know.
question.
I know.
So for Drew and I, we were just thinking like, okay, in another situation, we may not have the ability to control a project like this, but the state of life that we're in and with the resources we have, we can make this game. So we just should.
But why did you want to? Like, what about it was gnawing at you? Like, I hear all of that. That's not what I'm asking.
What was gnawing at me was that, like, John Company was a game that did well critically, and it sold well. But I also feel like it didn't get exactly what it was. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was, I think that it, like...
So it's your pet project, damn it.
Well, they're all my pet projects.
I know, but it sounds like you don't think that this game got the due that it deserved. And damn it, I'm going to make it to where it's gonna.
And I think that, like, I don't know. I just feel like I'm not done with it. Like, if I get one game about the East India Company, I'm not ready to leave that.
Okay.
Maybe part of it is, and this is a very deep callback, but you asked me many years ago, Edward, about how hard it was for me to leave a project behind.
Yes.
And I said it wasn't a problem because there were always other projects I wanted to work on.
However,
I was wrong. I was very wrong. That was a bad answer because, as it turns out, like I'm a little bit more like Walter Scott or one of those authors who, like, in midlife would be like, actually, I want to make sure that the things that I've made, I can properly curate them and present them exactly how I want them to be presented.
So John Company in its current iteration, current being the one we have, is not the John Company you wanted it to be.
There is a better way of doing it, and I think I can hit it. I really think about Traffic and John Company and Pamir.
Traffic being an infamous Traffic, right? Yeah.
Being this, like, kind of trilogy about respectability politics, about the British Empire, and about the different ways that it changed the world, often much for the worse. And I want to do justice to that project and, like, land it correctly. And I realize it's asinine to be continually revisiting my own work, but I also think that I really do feel like the first editions of the game were very strong first drafts, and I now have the resources and the time to, like, finish those projects.
See, and I think you're selling yourself a little short. Now, I'm going to call you on your stuff about the whole, I don't know how well Oath is going to do. Whatever, dude. But when it comes to that, I think you're being a little harsh on yourself in a sense that you're more experienced. You have more, a lot more design, and you've grown as a person. You're further along in fatherhood, just in life in general. And I feel like you've learned a lot. So I don't know
no,
that,
absolutely.
I think you're selling yourself a little short because PAX Premier First Edition, I thought was fantastic. It's way heavier and different than the second edition, but that's not to slight the first edition. It's just, it shows the growth of you as a designer. So I
But no, so I agree with that, and I'll have no false. I've gotten better at this stuff,
yeah,
but
which you should at this point, shouldn't you? I mean, it
yeah,
shows a
sure, right. I'm
growth,
doing
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
If I'm not getting better, I don't know why I'm spending all this time.
Exactly, right, right.
At the same time, the project of John Company and the project of Infamous Traffic and of Premiere, they were they're big projects. So like in graduate school, we would always talk about what kinds of book projects you wanted to write. And there was an awareness that like this is a really good idea, but you're a cub reporter, you're a beginning scholar. You want to try to take on that?
Right.
And I
Get
think
your feet wet first, right?
yeah. You want to get your feet, or do a single author study. Just get started somewhere where you can build on. And I didn't listen to those people, and I'm happy with the way those projects turned out to a degree. But I also think that like, okay, now I know how to attack John Company in a way that is like that is quite serious, and that I think can like elevate that whole project. And I'm doing it. I'm doing it not because I have some like bug in the back of my mind thinking about how I want to try to like fix a past mistake or anything. That isn't the animating force. The animating force is that the story of John Company is so complicated that it deserves another fuller treatment.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm in a good position to do it, so I'm just going to do it.
Okay.
And like, but it has. I think that like it isn't. It is different. The way I think about these second editions is different than the way they're usually thought of within gaming.
Okay, then tell me how Cole
Yeah.
looks at these.
Okay. Well, so within gaming, it's oftentimes about just accessibility or just increasing market share, and there's nothing wrong with that. To the point that even with Premiere, I was concerned about accessibility. I wanted that game to be more accessible, but the reason I wanted it to be accessible was because to me the political project of Premiere demanded a game that was more accessible and more tactile and had larger illustrations and had a more subtle argumentative framework. And so the animating the impetus behind second editions for me is the topic of the game deserving of a fuller and deeper treatment.
Okay.
And if it doesn't have to be by me, someone else can do it. Maybe not for, I'm not saying someone else can do a second edition for John Company, but if somebody had been like, this is the game on the East India Company, and they did everything that I wanted John Company to do, great. Now I don't have to make John Company second. That's excellent. I'm thrilled.
So that begs the question then, because you talked about the trilogy. I mean, you mentioned an Infamous Traffic. Is that something that you eventually want to revisit as well?
Yep, it's on the list. It's after.
Okay.
And with Infamous Traffic, right? I mean, who knows where I'm going to be at in a year or two on this one, but there are a couple of small things that the design isn't quite doing right. But other than that, I think it does a lot of good work.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see Traffic being like right now, like sort of the lowest impact of all these projects in terms of the change.
Okay, and the last question that I wanted.
I'll say one more thing about Traffic, and this is why I asked Tom if he wouldn't mind.
Tom from Hollandspiel. Yes.
Tom Russell and I talked very openly about Traffic, and I basically was of the opinion that if he was deriving a significant amount of income, he could keep the game as long as he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason why I would want to do it versus Tom is because the way I would want to do the production of Infamous Traffic would just be simply far too expensive for
what they do with the print on demand and everything,
I really
right?
think
Okay.
That, the price of John Company is probably going to be in that like $60 to $80 where Premiere sits territory, and that's the same range that I'm talking about for Infamous Traffic. But it's just he doesn't quite have access to the same sort of materials or resources.
Fair enough, and he's on board with that, obviously.
Mr. Joe Wiggins at Panda.
Okay. So last question on this, and this kind of falls in line with, just to kind of round everything out, is we've discussed PAX Premier, the differences between first edition, second edition being completely different games. And you're of the same mind that they are apples and giraffes. It sounds like to me that John Company and if eventually in Infamous Traffic, these sound like a second edition that keeps the core game intact, and it just kind of, I'm not going to say rounds off edges, because I feel like that's doing a disservice to it, but it's softer changes than the complete bones up rewrite that Premier got.
Yeah, I think it may turn out that the John Company redo is closer to the Premier side.
Oh, changing it pretty fundamentally.
Yeah, I think that a lot of it's funny because the core victory calculus that players have to do in Premier is very different in Premier 1 versus Premier 2.
Right.
And the difference in victory calculus in John Company from 1 to 2 will be less different. But a number of systems are being overhauled.
I was going to say, but how you get to that point is going to be significantly different. All right, fair enough. All right, so big question. A lot of people are, so Jess asked, Cole, what do you think about Omari Akil's thoughts on player pushback against randomness being their personal experience level with disparity in their life?
I loved this piece. I thought this was the best piece of game writing I had read in a long time, actually. I think it's brilliant. I was talking to some folks at work at lunch about the piece. So I'll give a very brief and bad summary that doesn't do it justice. It's not very long. You should just go read it.
Yeah, go read it. And
published in the Manifold. So he suggested. So he was talking about the pushback of some players to a random element, something seeming unfair. And he read this through the lens of race and said that, here you have people who have had privilege their entire lives, and they're upset when they lose something without there being a justification for it. And in fact, like if we're thinking about the Black experience, if we're thinking about the things that we take for granted maybe in the white experience, like this reaction makes absolute sense. So I found this piece was a complete revelation for me, because I've been tangling with the notion of unfairness for the better part of my creative life. Basically, every game I've worked on has had to do with where does my agency as a player end? And I mean, I gave a whole talk about it. Oath is about kingmaking. That is the game itself is about how kingmaking works and what are the limits of how we think about victory, justified victory. And then with just a little phase shift, suddenly we're having conversations about might and right and history. And I had never, and this was a blind spot. I had never routed that thinking through the lens of race. And it was immediately obvious that what we're looking at is a privileged class that is used to ordered systems that, give them pats on the head when they do something clever, getting upset when a turn of a die doesn't allow that to happen. And so I quite appreciated that. And I also appreciated just how forthright and sort of clear-headed Omari's piece was. I think it's incredible. And I hope that it allows people to understand that randomness and unfairness can be an aesthetic choice that a designer might be making. And this is something that I feel like wargamers have known for a long time. And I think that a lot of Eurogames could be improved by being a little less obsessed with them as a skill contest.
And that's really interesting, because it's something that I never honestly thought about as far as where that comes from. Because let's face it, it seems, and I don't want to pigeonhole any of us into this, but it seems that the more, I don't want to say serious, but the more heavy gamers tend to be less okay with randomness and that quote unquote fairness in games, because we should all start from take it as simple as, there's a first player advantage, right? Oh, that's got to be balanced out. Well, second player gets $1 more, third player gets $2 more, something like that.
Right.
And I've always thought, well, yeah, obviously it should be balanced because it should be a game of skill between, okay, we're all starting from the same spot. Who plays this game better? But it's an interesting thing to think about that, I'll be honest, wasn't even on my radar as far as should that be the case. It just, obviously it should. So I think it challenges a fundamental thing that we as gamers, and I would argue not serious, heavier gamers, because we tend to be less tolerant of unfairness or randomness in our games. And I think that is eye-opening in a good way. You know what I mean?
No, I had a group that I deeply loved. This couple I played with in Austin, and they would play these old German business games like Shoko and Co. and like these very silly, strange games.
Right.
And there are random things that happen in those games. It's a business game where suddenly it's like, oh, you filed your taxes wrong, lose a bunch of money, and it's laughable because it seems old-fashioned and capricious.
Yes.
But when you're playing it, it's like, no, this is business. I am writing this. I mean, it's actually one reason why I love Food Chain Magnate, but I actually find that fast food franchise.
Oh, don't even start me on that game. Oh.
It's insane. But I think it's a better restaurant simulator.
No! I
so
hated
chaotic.
my experience with that game. And I know Martin Fowler, who part of our group, he was a part of our game. We played that with, I cannot think of who brought it to game day one day. And he and I never had a chance in that game.
Yeah.
At all. Like, fundamentally, like, we just never, it wasn't that I made bad decisions or that we just never had a chance. And hated our experience with that game.
It's a game you hate. It is, to me, it has it captures something. And if you think about it more as an art piece and less like a contest.
And now
maybe that's the angle. Right?
Having looked at it through that lens of what was written, now all of a sudden,
right? It has there's a different virtue to it.
Exactly. But here's the question I have now. And this isn't, I mean, obviously, I think there's merit to what was written. I think there is, I think it's a profound thing to think about. And I'm not saying it's wrong. Mm-hmm. But I do want to ask the question now. And I'm not asking Cole, I'm just asking in general.
Sure.
Is that a game we want to play, though? Right. Does it make for an experience that we want to have on a regular basis? I don't know. And I'm not saying I don't. I'm just saying I don't know because I haven't gotten there yet. You know what I mean?
I should write something to Amari about his piece because I really was quite moved by it. But at least where I've gotten in my own design practice when it comes to fairness and randomness is that one of the problems with it is that it's a system that is very easily solved, right? Like if I know that there is a 1/3 chance I'm going to win, I mean, you can just like find the little Nash equilibriums and like know exactly how to treat a chaotic system. It's a strategic dead end. It's not expressive. Now,
hold on. For those of us that do not have a PhD, unpack that in English.
Okay, sorry. A lot of decision spaces. Mm-hmm. If you know the results, and you don't have to know the results perfectly. If you just have to know the proportion that the result is going to happen, what you can do is you can formulate a mixed strategy, which is going to help you capitalize on the nature of the game. So in rock, paper, scissors, the optimal strategy is to throw randomly. Because if you develop any bias, you'll be beat by a random player.
Okay, fair point. Yes.
Right.
Okay.
And so, like that's actually true for a lot of different systems and types of games. And one of the things that happens with a dice, if it's like, okay, and then in this situation, you and I are going to roll for the win, is that we're no longer making a choice. The game delivers its thematic punch, and maybe you win and maybe you don't. But if there weren't that many interesting inputs or outputs to
Right.
that event, then it's going to lose. It's not going to be very interesting after a play or two. This, I think, is it the Martin Wallace game Way Out West? Something about the way the Cowboys fight. I'm remembering from a game I played maybe 10 years ago, but well, actually probably 15 years ago. So in Way Out West, the way the Cowboys fight means like there's kind of an optimal strategy around just like having a shit ton of Cowboys.
Okay.
And just always making the roll to the win, because you're not going to win every game, but if there's a 1/3 chance that you're going to win and you're in a 4-player game, then that's pretty good.
Sure, you have more than the 25% you should have, right? Yeah.
So then what happens is everybody just has a bunch of Cowboys, and you're like, well, we should just be rolling a die.
Right. Okay.
And so one of the challenges to me when you're working with unfairness and with random events is that after the random event happens, the game needs to either end quickly, or that random event needs to shake the game in a way that presents new opportunities.
Right. There has to be decision space. Otherwise, what are we doing? Right. Yeah.
There has to be decision. And it's okay if you can make a decision not really sure exactly how it's going to shake out.
Right.
But even, we don't need to get too theoretical, and my game theory is very rusty right now. But the rule of thumb is, after the random event happens, is this still a system you want to explore?
Right.
And so StarCraft, which I'm playing a lot right now, doesn't really have random events. A unit does a certain amount of damage always. Mm-hmm. And if you're on a ledge, it has a certain chance to hit, but really the ledges are hardly important. It's like there's a lot of randomness in that game, though, but it's a randomness of timing. It's a randomness of in the wrong position at the wrong time. It's
player-driven randomness in that regard, right?
Yeah. And so even though, you might get lucky in the game, the core system is so robust that you want to keep exploring this same setting. And it's at a funny spot, because in my own practice, I feel like random elements, and even like playing with things that happen that are unfair, is such a powerful narrative tool that I want to use it, and I want to develop it, but I also it can't be the destination. It can just be part of the journey, to put it in kind of a hackneyed terms.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And isn't that kind of what Amari's kind of getting at, though?
Yeah. No, I mean,
I'm agreeing with you.
I think I agree with him almost wholeheartedly. But I think for other designers who might be jumping in and being like, okay, I really want to explore unfairness, you should just be very careful about what you're hoping to do with it.
Yes, I think again, it goes back to art imitating life. We're still playing games. In the end, we're still playing games, and there is a time and a place for every bit of it. Let me roll that back a little bit. There is a time and a place for different things in different emotions, things that I want to feel. Like if I play a game like colonialism, or I play a game like, I'm trying to think, or freedom even, right? The Underground Railroad. Those clearly have a place within this hobby. And I think that they are good games. I just don't know that I always want to feel what those games present to me all the time. So in the end, it's still everything in moderation. And I feel like even that, I mean, when I sit here talking about that, I feel like that's like gross privilege talking. Oh, I'm allowed to get away from that when I want to.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
but that's also part of the form that, like, we get to, not we, but maybe we, like, you get to compartmentalize your experience, right? You open the box.
Well, we all get to do that in this hobby, right? No matter who you are.
And I think, part of what Omari was saying is, like, not everybody gets to put it all back in the box, right?
Right, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like that's, I feel gross kind of thinking of it that way, but it's also reality.
No, and to that point, I think it's really important to be honest about our audience. So, like, okay, I'm making, Pamir is a game about Afghanistan.
Right.
I worked through a lot of translated primary sources for that
Mm-hmm.
game. I've never been to Afghanistan. I don't speak Dari. I tried to do my homework as best as I could. But I also recognize that my audience are Westerners.
Mm-hmm.
And, is this a game that I feel like I want to like play with an Afghani? Maybe not. Like this cultural history, like I think that I've done my best to represent the history as well as I can, but and I also think Pamir's a little bit of a different case because it is so old. I mean, we're talking about something that happened 200 years ago.
200. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so there's not that, but maybe a better example, for instance, would be like, um, I was working on a game about land rights in Minnesota right when I moved here, and what I found was the I wanted to do a project where I helped educate people about how a lot of the land takeovers of like Dakota and Ojibwe territory happened in the state. And what I found was that like the game form was just a really bad way to do that. And I kind of like abandoned the project because it was like, okay, this isn't like really the correct way to have this discourse. And also like these are still communities that exist. And this isn't the kind of intervention that would do anything. So I think you always want to be aware of the political context in which your game operates. And actually, one of the reasons why I feel strongly about still doing this triptych of games about Empire is because I feel like when I see games about Empire and the way people talk about them, they have a really like wrong-headed. Even the people who are well-meaning have a very wrong-headed sense of how it all went down. And there's a lot of like, and I think that we do have the necessary distance from a lot of the events that it's not difficult to say like, okay, if you understand what happened through through the frame of like accumulating cultural capital and respectability, a lot of things make sense. It doesn't excuse anything. It just helps make it sense, and then you can understand the kind of like long tendrils of those structures.
And the other thing, and then I'll touch on some of the things that are in chat right now. The other thing that I think is important when it comes to design, and obviously I'm not a designer. I'm one of those few people in this hobby that has zero interest in ever designing a game. But I appreciate what people like you do in this industry because without designers, we have no hobby, right? One of the things that I think war games, or if you would like the term conflict simulations, do is even if you don't like the side that you are playing or the sides as they are represented within the game, I think one important thing that designers and developers, everybody in line that has to do with the creation of a game, I think arguably, especially when it comes to anything historic, anything political, anything that current event or otherwise, I think one of the most important things that you do as a creator is you pique interest into the topic. And it gets people interested in learning more about, not learning about the version of it. Like, for instance, and not to go too deep into the weeds here, but Colonial Twilight, the French-Algerian War. I had zero knowledge that it took place. I had zero knowledge other than I know it's France and Algeria. I knew nothing about it, completely ignorant. And so when I was getting ready to play the game, I started doing some research, and it just broadens your knowledge and your interest in that topic. And I think one of the things that, like I said, you designers and everybody involved in the publishing and creation of these games is piquing interest in a certain topic of whatever it is, whether it's an infamous traffic like opium trading in the 19th century. Really? Like, no idea. Like, completely ignorant about it. Or whether it's something about current social issues. And I think that is a credit to this hobby. I think that's a really big deal that goes on, and that kind of piggybacks on one of the things that Garrick says in chat. He says, if games are ever to be a respected art form, we have to move past the notion that games must be fun. Not all statements or stories should be fun. There are plenty of experiential films that are not. I agree. At no point playing colonialism am I having fun. But I'm interested in the way, even though abstractly the game represents the exploitation and the removal of the inhabitants of the land before you can appropriate the resources of that area. That's not fun, but I think it's an important thing, and I'm glad that game exists, even if it's not fun. So I think that does happen. Maybe it doesn't happen to the degree that it should, but I do think I do think that happens, and I don't think that all games should be fun, but there needs to be a reason for people to play it.
Yeah, they have to be, because it could be an essay. Right, is what I always
Right.
think. Like, right, I mean, they don't. If I'm writing about, there was a while when I was working on a chapter of my dissertation about Afghanistan. I was like, okay, is this piece, like, is this actually correct to do in an essay form, or does it make sense in a different form? And so I think whatever your project is, you should be thinking about how it's looking, right, and not just. And I think that's what I ran into when I was working on the land project in Minnesota, where it was like, okay, this is just not a game. And I think that, there's no tragedy in that, right? Like, it isn't like I'm not like, oh, I'm so sad that I don't get to make this game I want to make. It's like, because it's not about me. It's about the subject and the argument that you want to build around that subject. And MJ, yes, you're right. It is Afghan, not Afghani. Sorry, I've been reading about Pakistanis all day. So I've been in Pakistan.
But yeah, and chat is kind of piggybacking on that, saying, look, even if I didn't know about it, games have made me want to investigate the topic more. So I think, and this goes back to what Omari wrote, right? That I think that even if a game isn't quote unquote fun, or it's not, it's unfair, or too much random, however it is you want to frame that, I think there's merit in creating a game, as long as it is it's interesting, right? Because it's not always about winning, although you have to have a chance. Otherwise, why are you bothering to play the game, right?
Right. I mean, the winning, we could have a whole chat about winning. But for me, it's like the thing that pulls the players into the game and keeps them there is there has to be a robust, like, either there has to be some kind of narrative fruit, or the system has to be interesting and curious enough that it holds our attention.
Right.
And so, like, the strength or curiosity of a system is almost like a plot, the thread of plot in a movie.
Oh no, not almost. It is. That's exactly it.
It's the thing that's holding you there. And I think that with some games, they actually can use plot. And it's funny when we're playing Oath in the office, we have one or two people who sometimes play with us who, when they play Oath, they are trying to win, but they'll often tell me things like, "I'm really playing for the story." And like, I kind of like lock into the story. They are trying to win. They understand that, like, the character that they're playing within the game is an ambitious figure who is trying to, legitimize themselves by the means set forth. But they're also, like, because they're treating it as a narrative first experience, it's allowing the system to breathe in a way that if you were just trying to min-max your position, you might drive yourself batty.
And that's good. Like, yeah. Games should. It's funny how much I have changed, morphed, grown, fill in the right word, because it used to be theme schmeme. Like, I couldn't give two shits about a theme. But now I'm of the mind that the narrative matters. Mechanical still matters. That is still the trump to me. That is still the driving thing. But give me a compelling narrative and a compelling theme, I'm in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is strange because I like I quite like traditional Euros. I feel like when I was in college, we played Kalis and Age of Steam like constantly. And I recently played Great Western Trail for the first time, which I think is a intricate and kind of marvelous game, but it washed over me like milk. It was like it didn't have any. It just didn't feel. It didn't generate. It didn't leave an impression on me. I'm intrigued by it. I wouldn't mind playing it again, even. Um, but it just didn't. Like I think playing that game, I felt outside of myself. And it's interesting because whereas like Democker or something, still like it delivers on like a story level.
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
it's incredible that I just like it's amazing to me the strength of that design. And there are some older games in that mode
Let me
too.
ask you something. What's the worst thing you could ever call a game? Like, what is the death knell for a game? Like, what term could you use that is the worst thing, in your opinion, that you could call a game? What?
Obvious. If a game is obvious, I'm done.
Really? See, well, I guess we're saying the worst thing you can call a game is boring. So
Yeah.
I think we're
Sure.
saying the
No, no,
same
no.
thing,
Yeah,
right?
no, yeah.
If a game's broken, that might be able to get fixed. You can't fix
and if
boring.
this is maybe a more elegant way of saying what I was saying earlier about random numbers. That like when you look at something, you're like, well, if they roll higher, they're going to win or whatever.
Right.
If that's the dead end, if that's the end of where analysis takes you, then me and this game are done. Right. Now, like that, obviously Oath has a die roll that determines when the game might end. But there's a lot that goes into like setting up that scenario.
Sure.
It's also I get to have fun, trolling people a little bit. Yeah, unremarkable, Andy says. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we're all saying the same. We're using a different word to say the same thing, right? Yeah.
Just don't like. I feel like as soon as I really understand a game, it kind of falls off for me.
Like I've seen what this game can offer. Okay, time to move on. Right. Yeah. Right. So this is fascinating. This is what I was hoping. I'll be honest. I had no idea what we were going to talk about tonight.
We didn't script any of this.
No, none of it. But this has been good. I know you have kids to get to.
I gotta read some bedtime stories.
Hey, priorities, bro. Family first. I totally understand that. So awesome. Two last things. Well, hold on. One last thing. Because I feel contractually obligated. Union versus Central. Just throwing that out there.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm gonna quickly answer like the 5 questions that I saw.
Go ahead. Go.
Constantly repeated. Union versus Central redraw may happen someday. Although Travis Hill did one, and now I feel like just use his. I mean, who knows? Like it's a game I'd like to publish it maybe.
By the way, I have a copy of that now. That's why I'm less anxious.
Good.
But I feel fundamentally important.
I wrote John a message and just said like, hey, if I were like, could I maybe get this from you? And
John Bohr of Win Some Games, for those that don't know. All right.
I could see a Whirly gig doing a small run of it because it'd be like this, talking about a passion project.
Oh, it has an audience of 12.
Project, like
100%.
Guess what? Just because I can, we're gonna like print some of this train game.
Please God, yes.
But it's because I think Dietrich is the designer, Denziger, like I can't remember exactly who, but he's either very ill or hard to like get in contact with. So it's like a little difficult to like figure out what's going to happen.
Okay, but maybe one day. It is a maybe.
Okay.
A
couple people have asked about the game about Chinese history,
yes.
which I did actually find. Oh, do I have it? I don't think I have it. It might be at work. I found my copy of it, which is hilarious. I thought it was in my parents' garage. It needs a ton of work, and it doesn't feel urgent. And so my current docket for Whirligig is do the Empire games, do the Reconstruction game.
Hold on, back up. Unpack that. Specific names. Like, what is it you're talking about? You got John Company first.
Yeah, so I would guess that my schedule is going to look like this. John Company, and then maybe Infamous Traffic is republished at the same time as we do the game about American Reconstruction.
Okay.
Maybe. And then Drew and I are working on another game about politics and cities and activism that feels very timely. But thinking about it for a while, but it's actually like it's a game about politics that isn't like Tammany Hall, that isn't
Okay.
like assassinations. It's like building a park. It's
Okay.
very like it's grounded, and that's very 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 early on, but it's something that we're stewing on. And then a few people asked me about games from last year that I really liked. There were a bunch. Last year's a good year. Watergate.
Boy, was it. Last year was amazing.
Oh, just so good. Just I thought last year had a lot of games. The one I've played the most probably is Watergate. Um, and then more recently than that, I've been playing a lot of Ride the Rails.
Nice. So basically, you are a Capstone fan.
Yeah, they nailed it. They nailed it. But that's all I'll answer now. All right, give me your final, and I got to go answer.
Oh no, it was the Union versus Central. That's it. That's the big thing. So good. All right. So real quick, how can people get a hold of you?
People can get me best on Twitter. My DMs are open. You can find me at Cole Wehrle, ColeWehrle.
All right. And as far as like, subscribe, I'll be honest, I don't care. If you want to like it, like it. If you want to subscribe, subscribe. Support the show, pledgehc.com. It's a free world. Do what you want. All right.
Yep.
Cole,
you like?
Thank you very much, dude. This was amazing. This it was better than I expected, and I expected it to be really good.
I'm keeping that bar nice and low. All right.
Go take care of your kids, man. I will see you later, all right? Thanks, everybody. Take care.